Okay, ready to dive into this whole randomness thing.
Let's do it.
You know, I was looking over the excerpts you shared from Fooled by Randomness
Yeah.
by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah.
It really got me thinking about, like, how much we as humans try to find reasons for things that maybe don't have reasons. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think it's a very, deep-seated human need to try to find order in chaos,
Right.
to try to make sense of things that maybe are just random, and we're really bad at it.
Yeah. Like, our brains don't like randomness.
No, they don't.
It's like we're wired to find patterns,
Mhm.
even when they're not really there.
Exactly. We see patterns where there are none. We see causality where there is none.
It's like we're always trying to connect the dots,
Right.
even if those dots are totally random.
And that can lead to some pretty bad decisions.
So this whole idea of randomness, it's not just some abstract philosophical concept. It has real-world implications.
Absolutely. It affects how we invest, how we make decisions about our health, our careers, really every aspect of our lives.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. You mentioned Taleb.
Right.
He kicks off his book with this really interesting story about Croesus.
Oh, yeah. Croesus.
Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Croesus was this, super rich king in ancient Lydia.
King of Lydia. Thought he had it all figured out.
Yeah, he was like the Jeff Bezos of his time. He had all the wealth, all the power.
All the outward signs of success.
Exactly. And he asks this wise Greek guy, Solon, hey, who's the happiest person you've ever met? Like, he's expecting Solon to point to him, right? Like, dude, you're obviously the happiest guy around.
Yeah, it's a great setup.
But Solon, he's not impressed by Croesus's bling. He basically tells him, hold your horses, buddy. You can't judge a life's happiness until it's over.
It's a classic reminder that fortune is fickle.
Right, like you might be on top of the world one day and then bam, something random happens and it all comes crashing down.
And that's what Taleb is getting at, right? We often mistake temporary success for lasting skill. We ignore the hidden role of chance.
It's like we see someone achieve something amazing.
Right.
And we automatically assume it's all because they're so talented or brilliant or whatever.
We want to believe there's a formula.
Right, like, oh, if I just follow these steps, I can achieve that too. But what we often miss is that luck, those random events, those chance encounters, they play a huge role.
And sometimes a bigger role than we'd like to admit.
So how do we even begin to separate skill from luck? Especially in areas like, say, finance, where randomness seems to be everywhere.
Well, that's one of the big questions Taleb tackles. He introduces these two characters, Nero Tulip, a cautious trader, and John, his risk-taking neighbor.
Okay, what happens to them?
Well, Nero, he plays it safe, avoids those big risky bets,
Smart guy.
and ends up wealthy.
So slow and steady wins a race.
Now, John, on the other hand, he's the opposite. Goes all in, takes huge risks,
I can see where this is going.
and ultimately loses everything,
Ouch.
right? And it's tempting, isn't it, to look at Nero and say, see, he was a smart one. He knew what he was doing.
Yeah, totally.
But Taleb argues that we can't just assume Nero's success was all due to his skill. He could have just gotten lucky.
So you're saying even Nero, the cautious one, might have just been in the right place at the right time.
Exactly. If we rewound the clock, played out those scenarios again, but with slight variations in those random events, who knows? Maybe John makes a killing. Maybe Nero loses it all. We only see the one version of history that actually happened, not all the potential paths that could have unfolded.
Whoa. Okay. So how do we make sense of success and failure when randomness is such a powerful force? Are we just at the mercy of fate?
Well, not exactly. Understanding randomness, it's not about giving up control. It's about making more informed decisions, even when things are uncertain. It's about knowing that we can't control everything, but we can control how we respond to what happens.
I like that. It's about being prepared for those unexpected twists and turns.
Right. And speaking of unexpected twists and turns, this brings us to another key concept, the black swan problem.
Okay, this sounds intriguing. Lay it on me.
Imagine, right, you've only ever seen white swans. So naturally, you conclude all swans are white, right? Makes sense.
Makes perfect sense.
But then one day, boom, you see a black swan, and your whole understanding of swans is shattered.
Wow, okay, I'm getting the metaphor here. So it's like those unexpected events that come out of nowhere and totally change the game.
Exactly. Like we build up these assumptions about the world based on our past experiences, but then a black swan event happens, and those assumptions are blown out of the water. And these events, they can have a massive impact, especially in areas like finance.
Right, because a single event, like a market crash or a pandemic, can trigger a whole chain reaction that affects everyone.
Yeah.
So if we can't predict these black swan events, what can we do? Do we just live in a constant state of paranoia, waiting for the next disaster to strike?
No, not at all. It's not about living in fear. It's about building resilience and flexibility into our plans, having a strategy that can handle different scenarios, even the ones we haven't even imagined yet.
So, being less attached to a specific outcome
Yeah.
and more focused on having a system that can adapt no matter what randomness throws our way.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing the uncertainty, knowing there will always be factors beyond our control.
So what you're saying is it's not about eliminating risk altogether, but about understanding and managing it.
Exactly. And this is where things get really interesting because Taleb goes deeper into how we often misunderstand risk and probability. It's like we're wired to make these mental errors, these cognitive biases that lead us astray.
Oh yeah, I've heard about those. They're like those mental shortcuts our brains take that sometimes backfire.
Precisely. And when it comes to probability, these biases can really mess with our decision making.
Okay, so we've established that the randomness is a real thing, it's all around us, and it can really mess with our plans. But how do we actually use these insights from Taleb to make better decisions in a world where we can't predict everything? That's the million-dollar question.
It is, and that's what we'll explore next.
So we've established that randomness is a real thing, it's all around us, and it can really mess with our plans. But how do we actually use these insights from Taleb to make better decisions? In a world where we can't predict everything, that's the million-dollar question.
It is, and that's what we'll explore now. One of the things that Taleb really emphasizes is this idea of understanding different types of randomness and how they affect our lives.
Okay, different types of randomness, so it's not just one size fits all.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not like all randomness is created equal. And he uses this really interesting example of dentists to illustrate this point.
Dentists, okay, now this, I gotta hear. How do dentists fit into all of this?
Well, think about it, right? A dentist, they have a pretty predictable income, right? They see a certain number of patients each day, perform procedures, and they get paid. There's not a lot of variation in their day-to-day earnings.
Okay, so it's a relatively stable profession. Not a lot of surprises there, but where's the
The randomness comes in when you compare the dentist path to someone who, say, invests in a high-risk, high-reward venture, like a startup or something.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about different levels of risk.
Right. The investor, they might hit it big and make a fortune overnight, or they might lose everything just as quickly. It's a much more volatile path with a lot more potential for both huge wins and devastating losses.
So the dentist represents a more, like, steady, predictable accumulation of wealth, while the investor is taking a gamble with much higher stakes and a lot more randomness involved.
Exactly. And the point that Taleb is making is that we often misunderstand the nature of success because we tend to focus on those outliers. The people who achieve those extraordinary results through a combination of skill and luck.
It's like we see the entrepreneur who sold their startup for millions and we think, wow, they're a genius. But we overlook the thousands who tried and failed.
Right. It's like that saying, it's easier to buy and sell than fry an egg. People look at those successful businesses and think, oh, that's easy, I could do that. But they don't see all the hard work, all the setbacks, and the sheer amount of luck that went into building that success.
Right. So much happens behind the scenes that we never see.
And this brings us to another really crucial concept, this idea of alternative histories.
Alternative histories. Okay, now we're getting into some sci-fi territory.
Not quite, but it's a really powerful way to think about randomness. Imagine we could rewind history and play it out again, but with slight variations each time. Maybe a key decision is made differently or a random event occurs at a different moment.
So you're saying like a choose-your-own-adventure for real life?
In a way, yeah. Now think about someone who achieved massive success in, say, the stock market. From the outside, it looks like they had this brilliant strategy and knack for picking the right stocks at the right time.
But if we played out those scenarios again, with those slight variations in those random events, maybe they wouldn't have made those same decisions. Maybe they would have lost it all.
Precisely. We only see the one version of history that actually happened, not all the potential paths that could have unfolded. And this makes it incredibly difficult to separate skill from luck, especially in fields where randomness plays such a huge role.
So if even the experts can be fooled by randomness, what hope do the rest of us have? Should we just throw our hands up and say whatever happens, happens?
Not at all. Understanding randomness isn't about giving up. It's about making more informed decisions, even though there's uncertainty. It's about recognizing the limits of our knowledge and accepting that we can't control everything.
Can you give me like a concrete example of how we can apply this understanding to, say, investing.
Absolutely. Let's say you're considering putting all your money into a single stock that's been performing really well lately. If you understand randomness, you'll realize that past performance is not a guarantee of future results. You might be tempted to go all in thinking you've found a sure thing.
But that's where the problem of induction comes in, right? Just because it's gone up in the past doesn't mean it'll keep going up.
Exactly. A savvy investor who understands randomness would consider the possibility of those unforeseen events. Those black swans that could disrupt the market and send that stock plummeting. They might diversify their portfolio, spread their risk across different assets, and they'd be mentally prepared for the possibility of both gains and losses.
So it's about being less attached to a specific outcome and more focused on having a strategy that can handle different scenarios, even the ones we might not be able to predict.
That's a great way to put it. It's about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and making decisions that are robust enough to withstand, the inevitable bumps along the way.
Now let's talk about something that really fascinated me in these excerpts. How our brains are wired to misunderstand probability. It's like we're walking around with these built-in blind spots that make us vulnerable to all sorts of errors in judgment.
That's right. Taleb delves into this whole world of cognitive biases, those mental shortcuts our brains use to process information quickly. They're probably helpful for our ancestors who needed to make those split-second decisions to survive. But in today's world, they can often lead us to make some pretty irrational choices.
Okay, so give me an example of one of these cognitive biases that might trip us up when it comes to probability.
Let's take the availability bias.
Hmm.
Have you ever noticed how after you see a news report about a plane crash, you suddenly feel much more anxious about flying, even though statistically it's still one of the safest modes of transportation?
Oh, absolutely. I remember watching Jaws as a kid and then refusing to go swimming in the ocean for months rationally. I knew the chances of being attacked by a shark were incredibly slim, but that vivid image, it stuck with me and just amplified my fear.
That's the availability bias in action. Your brain latches onto that vivid, easily recalled image of the shark attack and overestimates the likelihood of it happening, even though statistically it's a very rare event. And this bias, it affects our perception of risk in all sorts of situations, from investing to health decisions to everyday choices.
So if these biases are practically hardwired into our brains, how do we combat them?
Well, awareness is the first step. Once you understand that these biases exist, you can start to question your own assumptions and look for evidence that might contradict your initial gut reaction. It's about slowing down your thinking and being more deliberate in how you process information.
So it's like saying, okay, I'm feeling really anxious about this investment, but is that anxiety based on solid evidence, or am I letting my emotions get the better of me?
Exactly. And then you can start to look for data and facts that might challenge those initial assumptions. It's about recognizing that our brains are constantly trying to tell us stories to create a narrative that makes sense of the world. But sometimes those stories, they can be misleading, especially when they're based on faulty probability assessments.
Taleb also brings up this really mind-bending example,
Yeah.
the Monty Hall problem. This one really made me question my understanding of probability.
Yes, the Monty Hall problem, a classic brain teaser that highlights just how counterintuitive probability can be. Remember the scenario, you're on a game show and you have to choose between three doors. Behind one is a car and behind the other two are goats. You pick a door, and then the host, who knows where the car is, opens one of the other doors to reveal a goat. Then the host offers you the chance to switch your choice to the remaining closed door.
Right, and my initial thought was it doesn't matter if you switch it. It's a 50-50 chance either way. But the math actually shows that switching doors doubles your chances of winning the car.
Yeah.
I still can't quite wrap my head around why that is.
Yeah. It's a common misconception, it seems like. The odds should be equal because you're left with two doors. But it's all about the initial probabilities. When you first choose a door, you have a 1/3 chance of picking the car and a 2/3 chance of picking a goat.
Okay, I'm following so far.
Now, when the host reveals a goat behind one of the unchosen doors, they're not changing the initial probabilities. Your chosen door still has a 1/3 chance of having the car, but here's the key. The host's action of revealing a goat essentially concentrates that entire remaining 2/3 probability onto the other closed door. So by switching, you're essentially betting on that initial 2/3 probability instead of sticking with your original 1/3 chance.
Whoa, okay, my brain is starting to hurt a little bit, but I think I'm starting to see the logic. So even in seemingly simple situations, our intuition about probability can be totally off.
Exactly. The Monty Hall problem is a powerful example of how our gut feelings can mislead us when it comes to probability, even in scenarios that seem very straightforward.
So how do we apply these insights about probability blindness to our everyday lives?
Hmm.
I'm not exactly facing Monty Hall-style dilemmas every day.
True, but the principles apply to many different situations. When you're evaluating a business proposal or considering an investment, for example, it's crucial to look beyond the surface and consider all the potential outcomes, not just the most optimistic one. Are you being swayed by a compelling story, or are you grounding your decision in a realistic assessment of the probabilities?
So it's about being less swayed by, a compelling narrative and more focused on the actual numbers and potential risks involved, like not getting caught up in the hype of a hot stock tip without considering the possibility that it might be a bubble about to burst.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our emotions can cloud our judgment when it comes to probability and being willing to challenge our own assumptions and look for evidence that might contradict our initial gut feelings.
Taleb argues that even a basic understanding of these cognitive biases can dramatically improve our decision-making. It's like having a secret weapon against being fooled by randomness.
Precisely by understanding the hidden forces that are at play, we can navigate the world with more awareness and make choices that are more aligned with our long-term goals.
I love that idea. So it's not about avoiding risk entirely, but about approaching it with open eyes and a clear head.
Exactly. It's about moving from a place of fear and uncertainty to a place of informed strategic action.
This has been incredibly insightful so far, but before we get completely lost in the weeds of probability, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea that recognizing the role of chance doesn't mean we should just sit back and let fate take its course.
Absolutely. This is a crucial point. Understanding randomness doesn't negate the need for action. It means that we should act with awareness, humility, and a willingness to adapt to changing circumstances.
So it's not about passivity, but about a different kind of action, one that's informed by an understanding of the limitations of our knowledge and the unpredictability of the world.
Exactly. It's about embracing the unknown, not fearing it, and finding a sense of freedom and possibility within that uncertainty.
This brings us back to Solon's warning that we can't judge a life's success or happiness until it's truly over. Because, well, randomness can always throw us a curveball, right?
That's right. And this leads us to another key concept that Taleb explores this idea of the nonlinearity of life. Small, seemingly insignificant events can have this cascading effect, leading to outcomes that are completely disproportionate to their initial cause.
He uses this great example of the sand pile effect. You
Yeah.
can keep adding grains of sand to a pile, and for a while nothing much happens. But then one single grain can trigger an avalanche, reshaping the entire structure. It's like that butterfly effect idea, where
Yeah.
tiny actions can have huge unforeseen consequences.
Exactly. It's a powerful metaphor for how randomness operates in our lives. We can spend years building a career, a relationship, a life, and then one seemingly minor event can completely change the trajectory for better or worse.
It's a humbling thought. It makes you realize how much of what we consider success is actually about being in the right place at the right time, or conversely, how much failure might be due to circumstances beyond our control.
Precisely. And this awareness, it can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to let go of some of the pressure we put on ourselves to control every aspect of our lives. It invites us to embrace the uncertainty and find joy in the unexpected turns that life inevitably takes.
So it's not about becoming passive, but about recognizing that sometimes the best laid plans go awry, and that's okay. It's about learning to roll with the punches and adapt to whatever comes our way.
Precisely. It's about developing resilience and flexibility, allowing us to adapt and even thrive amidst the chaos. One thing that really resonated with me was Taleb's own personal philosophy when it comes to randomness. He doesn't try to eliminate risk entirely, but he's very deliberate in how he manages it.
Mm.
He talks about having wax in his ears when it comes to noise and distractions, actively filtering out information that he deems irrelevant or potentially misleading.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, I know I can be fooled by randomness, so I'm going to be extra careful about what information I let into my head. He's not closing himself off to new information entirely, but he's incredibly discerning, prioritizing deep, thoughtful analysis, overreacting to every little blip in the market or every sensationalized news story. That reminds me of how our brains are wired to prioritize speed over accuracy. Taleb is actively combating that tendency by slowing down his thinking and being more selective in what he pays attention to. It's like he's saying, hold on, brain, let's not jump to conclusions here. Let's take a step back, assess the situation, and make a conscious decision about how to respond.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that we have a choice in how we react to the constant stream of information and events that are swirling around us. We can choose to be reactive, letting our emotions and biases dictate our responses, or we can choose to be more mindful, more deliberate, and ultimately more in control of our own destinies.
This all makes a lot of sense. But I have to admit, it can be daunting to think about putting it into practice. How do we know when we're being fooled by randomness and when we're just, well, making bad decisions?
That's a great question, and it's one that doesn't have an easy answer.
Yeah.
There's no magic formula for separating the influence of randomness from our own choices and actions. But I think one of the most valuable things we can take away from Taleb's work is a sense of humility.
Humility.
Yes,
Yeah.
humility, recognizing that we don't have all the answers, that we can be wrong, that luck plays a role in both success and failure. It's about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and being open to the possibility that we might not always be right.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Humility allows us to be more open to learning from our mistakes, to adapting our strategies, and to embracing the unexpected turns that life inevitably throws our way.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this larger system, a complex web of interconnected events and forces that we can't fully comprehend or control. And within that system, randomness is a constant presence, a reminder that there will always be elements of chance and uncertainty that we have to navigate.
So it's not about becoming paralyzed by the fear of randomness, but rather about using that awareness to inform our actions and create a more fulfilling, more meaningful life.
Precisely, it's about finding a sense of peace and even excitement within the uncertainty, knowing that even amidst the chaos, there's beauty, there is opportunity, and there's always more to learn.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I'm definitely going to be thinking about randomness and its implications in a whole new way.
That's fantastic to hear, and I encourage you to keep exploring Taleb's work. There's so much more to uncover, and I have a feeling this conversation is just the beginning.
It's funny, before really digging into Taleb's work, I think I had this, underlying belief that if I just worked hard enough, made all the right choices, and I could kind of, control my destiny.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of randomness, it really throws a wrench into that, doesn't it?
It definitely challenges our illusions of control, that's for sure. We love to think we're the masters of our own fate. But the truth is, chance plays a much bigger role than we like to admit.
So, how do we reconcile this need for action, for striving towards goals, with this understanding that randomness can just, completely disrupt everything?
Well, Taleb, he doesn't advocate for just, sitting back and letting things happen. He actually argues that understanding randomness should empower us to take action, but it's a different kind of action.
Different how?
It's about recognizing that we can't control every outcome, but we can control how we respond to what happens.
So it's less about, forcing a specific result and more about having systems and strategies that can adapt to the unexpected.
Exactly. Being flexible, being open to adjusting course, and not being afraid to change direction when things shift.
This reminds me of something Taleb calls the barbell strategy for navigating risk. Can you unpack that a little?
Sure. The barbell strategy is all about balancing extremes. So instead of putting all your eggs in one basket, you diversify your approach. You allocate a portion of your resources to safe, low-risk options, and then another portion to those high-risk, high-reward ventures.
So kind of like having a safety net, but also leaving room for, big wins. You're not betting everything on one roll of the dice.
That's it. It's about finding that balance between caution and, boldness, stability and exploration. In investing, for example, it might mean having a solid core portfolio of low-risk bonds and index funds, but then setting aside a smaller percentage for those more speculative investments that could potentially yield huge returns.
Makes sense. It's like having a strong foundation, but also giving yourself permission to take some calculated risks in areas that, that really excite you or align with your goals.
And the barbell strategy isn't just about finances. You can apply it to many areas of life. Your career, for instance. You might have a stable job that provides a sense of security, but also pursue side projects or, entrepreneurial ventures that could lead to something more.
I like that. Creating a life with both structure and spontaneity. A balance between security and the freedom to explore new things.
This actually leads to another really interesting concept that Taleb explores, this idea of anti-fragility.
Anti-fragility. Okay, break that down for me.
So Taleb argues that instead of just trying to, mitigate or withstand shocks and stressors, we should aim to create systems that actually benefit from them.
So not just surviving chaos, but thriving in it.
Exactly. An anti-fragile system doesn't just bounce back from setbacks. It gets stronger because of them. Think about the human body. When you lift weights, you're actually creating these tiny tears in your muscle fibers.
Right.
But your body repairs those tears, builds the muscle back stronger, and that makes you more resilient for next time.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so how do we apply this idea of anti-fragility to other parts of our lives?
Well, it's about embracing challenges, not shying away from them. It's about learning from our mistakes, adapting our strategies, and constantly evolving based on, feedback and new information.
So instead of seeing setbacks as failures, we should look at them as like opportunities for growth.
Exactly. It's a shift in mindset that can help us navigate all the unpredictable stuff that life throws at us with more confidence.
Another thing Taleb talks about is this idea of having skin in the game. What does he mean by that?
Having skin in the game means you have something at stake. You have a personal investment in the outcome of your decisions.
So it's not just about talking the talk, it's about walking the walk, right? Like putting your own resources or reputation on the line.
Exactly. It's about ownership and accountability, knowing that your choices have real-world consequences.
This has been like a truly thought-provoking deep dive. I'm really starting to see how understanding randomness isn't just, some abstract concept, but a way to approach life with more awareness, more resilience, and honestly, just more freedom.
Beautifully put. It's about letting go of the illusion that we have total control and embracing the unknown. Not with fear, but with a sense of curiosity, a willingness to learn and adapt.
This deep dive has been a wild ride for sure. I feel like I gained a whole new perspective on how to navigate the complexities and uncertainties of life. I think the big takeaway for all of us is this. Randomness might be unavoidable, but being fooled by it is a choice. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those perspectives open.